advance it? Do you think it'll work? We'll see. Okay, when we talk about sexuality, and some of you may know, I used to teach, I am not teaching right now, a graduate level course on human sexuality at a secular university. And interestingly enough, not the actual lecture that you're receiving now, but there is an awful lot of Christianity that I make sure that the students at least are aware of, because the Bible really says a lot about sex. You realize that the first thing that identified you as you came into this world, when you were first born, before you had a chance to say anything, before you had a name, the doctor holds you up, usually by the feet. What a way to be brought into the world. Held up by the feet, upside down, smacks you on the behind, and says, it's a boy, it's a girl, your sexuality defines you. And it does. It does define you. And that's why Satan wants so much to attack this particular area. There's a lot of reasons, but that's one of the reasons. Because you see, we are made in the image of God. The first time that you find sexuality mentioned in the Bible is in the first chapter, verse 27, and he says, and this is God speaking, God created man in his own image, in the image of God created he him. And then he says, male and female. If we want to truly understand who God is, he is in relationship. There's a trinity. There is a connection. And if we're truly to understand what proper sexuality is, it's in the context of relationship. That's why sex outside of marriage is what? You just give it a word. Is sin. Is what?
Adultery.
Adultery is what?
Fornication.
Wrong, immoral, because it's a defilement of the very nature and character of God himself. You see, we're going to go into a little bit, but I want you to understand that God has created, and anytime he creates something, oh, by the way, we missed something, and that's this. I wanted you to know that what you're about to see is G-rated. We don't typically have young girls that are in our fellowship, but I think it's by divine providence that you're here today, because this really is, and Chris, it's for you too. And yes, it is also for you, Janice. Yes, yes. It is for all of us, because I want you to know that we can talk about sexuality, and interestingly, too often in the church, we don't talk about this subject, and then what happens is that the world informs young people what sexuality is about. And I want you to see how precious and sacred, how important it is. It's the world that diminishes sexuality, not God. Because he created it, and he created it with a purpose. And notice what he said. This is the next verse. This is verse 28. He said, be fruitful and multiply. The purpose of sex, the first purpose, is for what we call procreation. It is for reproduction. It is for being fruitful. It is for you having children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and progeny after that. You're invited by God to co-create with him. Something that didn't exist before, you, by his grace, are bringing into the world. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, hallelujah.
It really is. It's absolutely amazing. We don't create anything. All we do is rearrange molecules. But when it comes to a child, to a soul being brought into the world, God has invited you to be a participant with him in bringing life that didn't exist before into this world. That's an absolute amazing fact. And that's done through the act of sexuality. Genesis chapter 2, God said another purpose is for intimacy. He looked at Adam and he said, Adam, it's not good that man should be alone. I want you to notice the next verse. That's why I kept all the verses together. And then after that, Adam names all the animals. He says, it's not good for you to be alone. And Adam starts looking around and he says, there's a zebra. I don't know what the Hebrew word for zebra is, but my hunch is, knowing what I know about Hebrew, everything that Adam named had a characteristic of the character of the animal in the name itself. So he probably named it striped horse. because that's what it would mean. And he looked at the dog, and he said, yappy one. And he went on and on. He didn't name cats. I am confident Adam wouldn't name a cat. Eve would. Okay, in any event, he goes through all of the animals. And when he gets all done, did he find intimacy? Did he find fellowship? Did he find relationship? Did he find his loneliness satisfied? Answer?
No.
No. I don't care how nice your dog is. I was at the Red Barn yesterday. Now that's a cultural experience for you. And for you that are from St. Louis, that's our local flea market. And usually it's called flea for a reason. But in any event, it's really a nice place in reality. But there was this one lady. She was carrying her dog like it was, and I said to Bonnie, it reminds me of Germany. In Germany, we would have an expression that the German parents loved their dogs more than their children. This was a woman that carried her dog like a child in a papoose on the front. Well, I'm not saying it's wrong. That has nothing to do with it. It's just simply that we are substituting intimacy with others with pets, especially as we get older. And that's what God says as he looks at Adam and says, it's not good that you're alone. And so he creates Eve. And you'll notice that the word ish is the word for man. Isha is the Hebrew word for woman. It simply means out of man. You have the same thing with the English word woman and man. The word woman simply means man with a womb. That's where you got your word, woman, womb man from. It doesn't mean, whoa, man. Okay, 1 Corinthians, also another purpose having to do with intimacy. Nevertheless, neither is a man independent of a woman, nor a woman independent of a man in the Lord. It's really important to understand that there is a relationship, and that relationship is I'm incomplete without a woman. And there needs to be one woman, and not one man, by the way. Proverbs chapter 3, or chapter 5. Oh, this is really great. It was somebody that came to me. This goes back. I was 27 years old, and I was counseling then. And I had this man that was coming to me. He had his wife. This is really crazy. He had his wife, and he'd bring his girlfriend over to the house, and his wife would prepare meals for this man and his girlfriend. It was absolutely bizarre. But you see, the world is bizarre. It really is. It doesn't make sense. You've got to be schizophrenic to understand it. Well, in any event, he came to me, he had some other problems, and I said to him, you know, the Bible says that adultery is wrong. I said, I'd like you to look and find the consequences of adultery. And just go to Proverbs chapters 5, 6, and 7. Because in Proverbs 5, 6, and 7, it has, just those 3 chapters, it has a long list of consequences. So what I did was, I gave him those chapters, and he didn't do his homework, but I did. And what I found was this. There's 37 consequences just for adultery. Some folks say, well, sin is sin. That's true. But you're not going to get AIDS by robbing a bank. But neither are you going to end up in prison for having an adulterous relationship, in this country at least. You see, every sin has the consequences. And there are serious consequences for adultery. So it's really important as we look at that. Here's chapter 5, and he says, and this is a summation of chapter 5, and it's really great. He gives warning, and then he gives this exhortation. Let your fountain, the fountain is the source of refreshment, the source of where you find purification. And let me assure you, if you're a husband, you know what I'm talking about. Your wife will keep you straight. I have 3 daughters too, Scott. And let me tell you, between my daughters, my wife, and the Holy Spirit, I didn't have any choice. He says, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth as a loving deer and a graceful doe. Let her breasts Satisfy, and I put in there the Hebrew meaning of that word satisfy, literally means you be fixated, you be fascinated by her. Men are attracted to a woman's figure. That is absolutely true. It's the way we're wired. Women aren't necessarily attracted by the way a man looks, more by the way he acts. But when it comes to men, men are attracted by what they see. Well, what Solomon is saying is, and here's a guy that ought to know, he had 600 wives and 400 concubines, 1,000 women. I don't know how he had the time. And for a guy that was so wise, whew. In any event, he says, let her breast satisfy, fascinate you at all times and always be. And now the word enraptured, this is the New King James, but the word in the King James is ravaged. The word in the Hebrew, literal translation, is intoxicated. You be intoxicated with her love. And you know what intoxication does? I'm not going to ask for a personal testimony here. But intoxication causes you to think a different way, causes you to talk a different way, causes you to walk a different way, causes you to think a different way. You're even seeing differently. The world is different when you're intoxicated, and that's what this word means. Your love by her causes you to be thinking, feeling, and experiencing life different. That's what it means. In case you're wondering who that lovely couple is, that's my daughter and son-in-law. And it's also not only designed by God for reflecting His image, not only is it designed for procreation, not only is it for intimacy, it is also for pleasure. It says in Hebrews, and you may be familiar with the passage, it says that the marriage bed is undefiled. The word for bed there in the Greek is coitus. And I think you know what coitus means. Notice he goes on to say, fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Song of Solomon. You know that this book was banned by the Catholic Church? You know why?
Too busy.
You haven't read it recently, have you? It really is. It's an incredible love story. And I mean love story. Those who have been reading, was it Shades of Grey or whatever it is? By the way, that's pornography. It really is. It's tragic, sadomasochistic pornography. It's been popularized, written by a man, but popularized for women. You want to read about sexuality that's intimate and in the context of love and marriage, this is a great book. But notice what he says. I just picked out one passage. How fair and how pleasant you are, O love, with your delights. This statute of yours is like a palm. This stature of yours is like a palm tree. I'd never say that to Bonnie. But a palm tree, by the way, is someone who's able to take the storms. Only in Florida and in places like the tropics where you have hurricanes. An elm would never make it, or an oak would never make it like a palm tree would, because it's able to bend all the way down and come right back up after the storm is over. So he's saying your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like clusters. I said, I will look up to the palm tree, I will take hold of its branches, and now he goes on from there. And it's very, very graphic. It's very much in detail, but it's in the context. Not in the context of something pornographic or to elicit, arouse for just some narcissistic personal gratification, but instead for the purpose of intimacy and delight in the one whom you love. It's really a picture of our relationship with God, by the way. And then he says, it's not designed with shame. The first time you find shame mentioned in the Bible is in this passage, and that is that God says that He created them naked, and they weren't ashamed. The next time you find the word shame mentioned is in chapter 3. And Adam is hearing the voice of God. Adam, Adam, where are you? God knows where he's at. Do you know why God was crying out to Adam? Come out from behind that palm tree. You know why? We need to admit, God knows. He knows where you're at. He knows your thoughts right now. But it's us that need to confess to God. That's why that passage is there. But when they say that, they were ashamed. Adam says, I ate the tree of knowledge, and when I ate it, we saw that we were naked and we were ashamed. Shame comes as a result of sin. Interestingly, you can check me out to see if I'm right, as I work an awful lot with folks that are dealing with shame. Guilt is when I've done something wrong. I stole a pencil and I didn't return it. That is something specific. I did wrong. I can return it, replace it. Shame, on the other hand, is a judgment of myself. I'm saying I'm wrong. I'm defective. There's something wrong with me. There's nothing to confess. It's really difficult. But you check me out. Every time you find the word shame in the scriptures, you'll find it in the context of sexuality. It talks about a woman raising her skirt and exposing her shame. It's always in the context of sexuality. And it's when it's inappropriate. There is no shame in the marriage context, but there is shame outside of the marriage context. And then as a result, notice what happens. Remember, I just said that guilt is when I did something wrong. Shame is when I think I'm wrong. And it's a redefinition of who I am. Remember our first point? We're made in the image of God. And in the very image of God, He made us male and female. And it's in that, we've lost that to a large degree, not completely. But in a sexual context, outside of what God prescribes, we now have shame and we feel dirty. We feel there's something wrong. We feel there's something broken about us. You may remember this. Wasn't that long ago. I'm teaching history to you guys. And Chris, I don't think you were even alive. But this is history. Okay? And that is that on January the 17th, 1998, Drudge reported that there was a sexual scandal between the president and a 22-year-old intern. And then right after that, Lewinsky turned over evidence that proved that, in fact, he was guilty after he denied and said, I've never had sex with that woman. And then on August the 17th, he is nationally televising a statement of contrition and confession that he had an inappropriate sexual or physical relationship with Ms. Lewinsky. And then on the 19th of December, he's impeached by the House of Representatives. That's a shame. It was a shame not only to the Clintons, Mrs. Clinton, as well as Mr. Clinton. It was a shame to our country. Then you may remember, and it's not just in the context of one particular party. I hit both here. August the 13th, 2004, you have James McGreevey, and he admits that he is having a homosexual relationship, governor of the state of New Jersey. And then Ted Haggard, you may recognize that name. Ted Haggard not only was the head of the National Association of Evangelicals, which many mainline denominations, such as the EFCA, are a part of. But I say mainline, I'm talking about mainline but are evangelical, that are conservative, are associated with this. He was the president of it. He was also the pastor of an extremely large church, one of the largest churches in America, in Colorado Springs in Colorado. And he admitted that he had a relationship with someone of the same sex. Larry Craig, you probably remember him. He was the Republican that claimed that he had a wide stance while he was in an airport bathroom. And then you see that the scandal broke out, and he tried to continue to plead that he was innocent. There's scandal with all of this. There's shame with all of this. And it doesn't matter what your rank in society is. There is shame. Doesn't matter if you're a pastor. Doesn't matter if you're a president. Doesn't matter if you're a congressman. That's why I picked these individuals. Now, God's created sex, and He's designed it with distinct differences. And I just wanted to show you some of the differences. Peter says this, husbands, dwell with your wives according to knowledge as the weaker vessel, and be not bitter against them, lest your prayers are hindered. Oftentimes, I would quote this, and then Bonnie started quoting it. Now, that was a problem. Because here's what would happen. I typically had my devotions. I would leave the house, have my devotions at the church building. And if I had had a conflict with Bonnie, I'd call her up. And she would almost interrupt me. And she'd say, what, you can't have your devotions? Because it says, lest your prayers be hindered. If there's bitterness, if there's resentment, if there is a fight we haven't resolved, then that's going to happen. And that's what that passage says. But notice the phrase, weaker vessel. Do you believe, ladies, that you're the weaker vessel? Yes? No? I want to see whether I'm among friends or not.
No.
Okay. I'm going to show that that is true. And I'm going to get myself in lots and lots of trouble. Okay, I'm going to just run through this real quickly. Physical differences. This will be online, so you can get all of these yourself, and that way you can see what are the differences. There are differences in terms of chromosomes. People ask me, and I'm asked quite frequently, are people born homosexual? Well, we're going to get into that really in our next presentation, which will be next week on homosexuality. But you have 26 chromosomes. Either you're an XY or you're a YY. Who's an XY? Would you raise your hand? I want to see all the XYs. Right, yeah, you want to raise your hand. You heard your wife. Hey, this is your time. If you're a man, you raise your hand. Okay? You're an XY. Remember, a woman was taken out of a man. Interestingly, when we're first conceived, we're all conceived female. However, in the process of development, we become an XY as a male. But a woman remains a YY. And many husbands are asking that question ever since. Why? Why? Okay. Y is a female chromosome. We don't have any other options. You're either an XY or a YY. Charlie, am I right? Thank you. Charlie is our resident medical professional. And it is right. Not because I said it, just simply because it is. A woman has a constitutional vitality, and it's because of the chromosomal difference, and therefore she lives longer, oftentimes 3 to 4 years longer than men. As a result of that, also her basal or basic metabolism is slower than a man's, which also contributes to better life and longevity. There is a skeletal difference. There's 206 bones in the human body, and if I was a paleontologist that dug you up 100 years from now, and all they found was one of your phalanges, one of your little fingers, even the tip of your little finger, would they be able to tell if you were a male or female just in that?
Yes.
Answer?
Yes.
Yes. Believe it or not, they can tell not only by the structure of the bone, but they can also tell by what's called the porosity or the density of the bone. All women have less density in their bones than males do. Not fair, is it? But part of that is because in childbearing, a woman gives her strength, literally, her calcium to the making and developing of her baby. But in any event, the skeletal structure, a female has larger stomach, and in this area, but smaller lungs. In terms of function, there are some things, guys, I don't care. We can't do it. One of them is we can't have a menstrual cycle. Aren't you happy? Bonnie was convinced that the plague, or the curse that God promised to women, was not that they would have labor and childbearing, but that every 28 days she would have a visitor that would show up. There is a difference, but you'll notice there is a gross difference between men and women. Men cannot conceive, they cannot have babies. although science is trying very hard to make that happen. Blood. Even the blood of a female and a male is different. More water in a female's blood. Brute strength, men are 50% stronger. And while this isn't politically correct, even the Marine Corps has a different set of standards for women than men. Simply because of upper body strength. Men can do push-ups easy, or easier. For women, it's very difficult. It is. It's just very difficult. Chin-ups. My grandson, he's got a chin-up bar in our house. And of course, there was a time when I could do more than him. Now I watch him and cheer him on. In the meantime, there is my granddaughter. My granddaughter is 11 years old. And she's trying to do chin-ups. And if she does 2, I cheer her. That's really a lot for her. The heart beats more rapidly for a woman. And therefore, blood pressure is about 10 points lower for a man than a woman. By the way, one of the questions I was asking somebody who works in pharmaceuticals earlier this week is that most psychotropic drugs, which are drugs for the mind or the head, are gauged for men. And so when you have pharmaceutical firms that are prescribing antidepressants, a woman has an up and down depending upon the time of the month that she has. That, therefore, creates for pharmaceutical firms a real problem in trying to figure out what kind of medication and the dosage of that medication. It's a lot easier to treat men, but then we prescribe the same thing to everyone. And so if you're taking any kind of antidepressant or anti-anxiety meds, it'd be very wise to always check with your psychiatrist rather frequently to make sure you're getting the right dosage if you're a female. There is the capacity to breathe is lower. She can stand higher temperatures and actually endure more pain. She has a higher pain threshold. As you may remember Bill Cosby years ago describing what childbirth is like, taking your upper lip. You remember that? Drew can actually go into detail and actually give you a demonstration of it, I'm quite confident. But in any event, we men can't do that. We really can't. We don't have the threshold of pain for women is far greater. When it says that in the world you'll have tribulation, the word for tribulation is the word thalipsis in the Greek. It's the same word for childbearing. And that is really something that when Jesus is describing tribulation, there is no greater word than that of labor for childbearing. So that's why you find that. Higher temperature, immunization. Her immunization is far better. Yes, Drew?
I just got to share this video on YouTube, and it's perfectly, absolutely clean in every sense.
Good.
2 gentlemen are actually with their wives, and they go to a hospital, and they actually simulate childbirth for these men. It is the funniest thing you will ever watch. They're crying. Just Google 2 men simulating childbirth.
Thank you.
But it really does prove your point because
I'm picturing Bill Cosby standing over one of them saying, "Poosh, poosh." Okay, infant mortality. Males have a higher rate of infant mortality, not nearly as strong as even in birth as little girls are. Language, you probably already know this, is that little girls early, I mean really, they come out of the womb talking. I almost am joking, but seriously, their brain is connected in a way that guys aren't. There's a singular gyrus that's between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. For a guy, and I'm talking about males now, for men, boys, that's you, Chris, we only think with our left brain, which means we're out of our right minds. No, it doesn't mean that. We do think with our right, however, the left is more dominant. And what's the problem with that? The left side of the brain is the more analytical, logical side, fact-based side. The right side is relational and language. We guys have a real hard time, even younger. We don't really catch up with girls until we're in high school in terms of our capacity to verbalize what we're feeling and thinking. And some guys never actually get to the place of verbalizing feelings.
Well, there's scriptural support, actual statement for that, too.
Uh-oh. Go ahead, John.
Women do have superior language skills. I mean, there was a woman who was able to speak to the snake.
It was a what?
There was a woman who was able to speak to the snake.
John is our Hebrew scholar, and he is pointing out that Eve had the capacity to talk to a snake. Actually, you may remember the name Jean Dixon. Yes. Maybe you remember in the book Gift of Prophecy, written by Ruth Montgomery, that she, in the beginning, describes that Jean Dixon had the gift of prophecy by looking into the eyes of a cobra. And she was the snake whisperer. But all kidding aside, women do have the capacity. And that's still true. Did you notice who prayed before we began our service? Did you hear any guys? Did you notice that? I don't want to say that's healthy. I'm just making an observation and saying quite honestly that's normal. That's really, we guys have to work on it. Because we would let women do all the talking. And usually if you have a Bible study and it's men and women mixed, and it's a small group, the gals will do the talking and the guys will do the listening. At least we hope they're listening. Okay, go to the next one. Females mature faster than males. So, Scott, you're blessed. And they do. They are, the way in which they're designed, far more adapting to childbearing, even nurturing and raising children, which is why the courts, up until the last 20 years, always would award child custody or parental primary custodial care to the mother, because she's just naturally more inclined to do the caring for a child. And you will be blessed to know, and I quit with this one, guys are just naturally adaptable to, what are those words? I can't read them.
Hunting.
Hunting. Boy, was there a little bit of an edge to that word. Fishing would be in that list too, wouldn't it?
Golfing.
And what?
Golf.
Golfing, yes. There we go. Okay, psychological differences. I'm going to go through this rather quickly, at least I hope I'll be quick. And that is that there are verbal and spatial abilities that girls and guys are different. For girls, the verbal, by the way, the verbal is right here by your temporal lobes. The spatial is back here. So if you've had a car accident, your head went back and you hit something, or you fell and you hit your head, you could have an impairment in terms of being able to have depth perception. But guys have a higher ability to be able to have spatial abilities, whereas girls have a higher ability. And this is right from, we're talking 4 and 5-year-olds are able to be much more verbal. Number 2 is that girls are far more sensitive to sounds. And if you'll notice, by the way, and this isn't a joke, it's just true, is that guys after the age of 40, their ability to hear high-pitched sounds diminishes. And so now when Bonnie asks me to do something, women have higher skin sensitivity. It's real interesting. There are more nerves on the end of a woman's fingertips than on the end of a man's. I go into all this detail because I had somebody that was seeing me who is transsexual, which means they changed gender, and we'll talk more about that at least a little bit next week. But I told him, you didn't change anything. All you did was change some apparatus, but you didn't change anything because your brain's the same, all the bones are the same, your chromosomes are the same, nothing has changed, even the neurons in your fingertips. Women are far more sensitive to touch than guys. Richard.
When I was in typing class in school, I worked my butt off to get 50 words a minute. and these girls were doing 68 and 70 words a minute. I was determined I was gonna catch them, but there's no way I could.
No. And so what do you do now? Have your wife do the typing, right? Marilyn do the typing?
No.
Okay, boys have higher visual superiority, and this is also where the issue is. Guys have given, and this is where Jesus said, you know, if the eye be single, it's full of light, but if it's darkness, then woe be to that. It's better to have your eye plucked out and go to heaven blind than it is to go to hell seeing. And it's guys, if you see a woman and lust after her, we guys are just motivated by what we see, which is also very important for gals, that you dress modestly. Boys have better body coordination, attentional differences, and curious about exploring. Boys just are, girls not so much. And that's from early childhood. You'll notice at the age of 4, the little boys are out climbing trees and going into caves and, you know, exploring anything. Whereas little girls, they're very happy to sit in the living room and do whatever. Now, I'm not trying to, you know, play dolls. You know. Boys can manipulate three-dimensional stuff, so they're really good with, you know, pickup sticks and things like that. The IQ test is really interesting. When I was at Princeton, they had to have, there was a debate. Actually, they changed the IQ test, the Wisher test for children, in 1972, because there's 11 different factors, and we found that only 2 of them really apply to men and women, or boys and girls, the same. The way in which the questions are worded, the way in which the certain profile is, women and guys are very, very different. So we really, you would think an IQ test is an IQ test, and it is. Girls are more assertive, and if they are more assertive and active, usually that plays into their higher IQ. And so I want to encourage that. Just out of, just to say something that I think will be helpful. We have what's called the Turtle Twos. You're familiar with it? Do you know that really that's necessary? It's a part of their development. If a child does not go through that stage, and it's a stage of self-assertiveness, they typically will have problems later on with passivity, and it does affect their mental or cognitive development. It really is important that a child learns to be able to express themselves, but do it in a way that's not rebellious. You know, you have a child that's very compliant, and you think, oh, that's a model child. Actually, that's not healthy. Boys are far more hyperactive. You can see the statistics up there in terms of hyperactivity. And you probably are hearing a lot of stuff on the news with regarding what psychologists are thinking regarding ADD and ADHD. There's a big debate as to whether or not even that exists, let alone, and we've said for years, that it's an overdiagnosed symptom. Because the male brain is visual, he learns by seeing or doing, whereas girls by reading and by language. So guys, typically, when you ask a guy, how many books have you read? And I don't care what the age. Typically, guys don't read. Whereas women, you know, find great delight in reading books. And it's just the way men and women learn. And it's important to know that difference. I'm not going to, I'll let you can upload that and read it. It's really funny. But I'm not going to waste the time. Chances of winning an argument in terms of men and women, there is a very, very clear difference. And it's important to know that difference is that when you're dating, you will find that you had at least a half-fighting chance of winning the argument, but when the engagement took place, things took a change, and now that you're married, you just say, yes, dear. Okay, and oftentimes this is so true. In fact, I give assignments to various people, and one person I gave the assignment to, and I said, I drew this symbol of a male and a symbol of a female, and I said, please fill in the hole in the O. Draw what you think a woman looks like, and then what a man looks like. And it was all symbolic, by the way. It's not. But a guy just line straight. I mean, it's real simple in her ideas. Women are complex, and it was floral, it was beautiful. Actually, I wanted to frame it. It was really nice. For a guy, I thought he was in prison. All I could see were bars. But her idea was, what you were seeing here, is that it's very, very simple. We guys, this is something you may have seen in terms of a guy wants to go to the mall. This is so true. I wanted to go. You know, the last time I was at the DeSoto Mall, it was Christmas 4 years ago. And when I go in for one purpose. I'm out of there. I try to set a record. But when somebody else, fortunately I don't have a wife that likes to shop, but really many, many times, my girls, they would go shopping. They could spend the whole day there. Not spend a dime, but they spent the whole day there. They meandered through the whole place. And that's how, a woman's brain works. I'm going to skip that one, but I think you get the idea rather quickly. The design with differences of roles. I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covers, dishonors his head. Every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered, dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. Shaved in Corinth was what prostitutes were. Their heads were totally shaved. Then he goes on to say, in case you're wondering about that particular passage, the last verse of 1 Corinthians 11 says, if any man has a contention over this custom, we have no such custom. That was a practice in Corinth that women would wear head coverings. And so you'll notice that Mennonites wear head coverings, that very typically brethren will wear head coverings. There's nothing wrong with it, and if I see a lady with a head covering, that's wonderful. My concern more is not about whether or not you're wearing a head covering. It's about, do you reverence, do you respect your husband? Do you regard him, and do you honor him by submitting to him? When I use the word submit, that sounds like an ugly word, particularly in today's world. But the word actually is a military term. It means to rank under. The general isn't more important than the corporal or private, I'll assure you. Wars are not won by generals. They don't typically go on the battlefield unless they're patent. No, but at the same time, there is to be a regard and respect for those that are in authority, and that's what the whole purpose is. There's a difference of role. In 1 Timothy, and this is another one that really is controversial. I put it here because, we don't talk about these things. In fact, many avoid it very, very carefully because we live in a time when to talk about these kinds of things sounds like we're talking about the end of the Diluvian period before the flood. And yet, Paul's saying, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man, but to be in silence. Adam was first formed, then Eve. Adam wasn't deceived, the woman was deceived. Adam transgressed. He knowingly knew what he was doing. Here's the real problem, if you read the text, is that God gave the command not to Adam and Eve not to touch or to eat of the tree of knowledge. He gave it to Adam only. And then you'll notice, then Eve is taken out of him. Then they're confronted with the snake in chapter 3. Eve never got the message directly from God. The problem was Adam never informed his wife and stood right by her side when she's listening to that snake or Satan. The whole point here is that we have a differences of role. The men have a responsibility to lovingly lead their wives and to teach what God has directed. In the context of marriage, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, great passage. You see, the Corinthians, they were so immoral. I've been to Corinth, and it's a very, very interesting place to visit. But you'll see that debauchery and sexuality was extremely popular. You probably have seen the discus thrower, and you remember he's nude. That's how the Olympics were run. The second most popular city in Greece for the Olympics, because the Olympics were played in Olympia. But the second greatest city was Corinth. And they were very much known for that. And so these folks said, hey, wait, if sex is bad, then maybe we shouldn't have any conjugal relationship in marriage. And Paul's arguing, no, that's not the case at all. In fact, if you withhold, then there's a problem. There's the works of the flesh. There's an order to this. Notice that the word poinia is poichia is the word for adultery. It's just simply intercourse, relation with someone other than your spouse. Remember what the Hebrew word is for no or sexual intimacy. What's the word?
Yada.
Thank you, thank you. And so for your sakes, because you've not been here to learn this, Seinfeld is Jewish. And when he said yada, 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 what he's saying is, I know, I know, I know. There's 4 Hebrew words for know. The word he used is the word for intimate, thorough knowledge that is used for sexual intimacy. That word is the word that David uses in having a relationship with God and knowing God. That's why Satan attacks sexuality. It's really attacking the Trinity and your relationship to God himself. Why adultery, by the way, is one of the 3 capital punishments. Capital meaning if you violate the law of blasphemy, murder, or adultery, you get decapitated. You die. And the reason is because it is such a severe violation of covenant. And that's what the issue was there. Fornication, poinia, is a very, very general term. It not only means sex prior to marriage, it also it covers just a whole lot of other things. In fact, you find this, thou shalt not commit adultery in Exodus, and then you find the passage I had referred to earlier in Hebrews 13. Notice fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. The next word is uncleanness. Catharsis is the word for to clean. So sometimes people talk about going to a therapist and having a cathartic moment when they just simply poured out all of the stuff that they've been storing all of their lives that's been dirty or that's been guilting them. This word is just the opposite. Instead of clean, it means you are actually making yourself increasingly more unclean. You're bringing garbage into your mind. You know the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. I don't think Einstein ever said this, but I like the quote. And that is the idea, if you're watching 2 hours of violence on a movie, does it really have no influence on your behavior? Apply that same logic then to pornography. This is a major, 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 major issue. Some of you know I work with offenders. Most offenders are not predating on little children, but some do. Let me tell you, it's a serious, serious problem. It's a serious problem in our community. Lasciviousness. They work in progression. Violate the relationship with your wife or husband. That plays into, you'll see your children. Whatever the parents do in moderation, children do in excess. You'll see it then go down into fornication. Then from fornication to then uncleanness. Lasciviousness is different than uncleanness. Pornography is where you're doing it, nobody else knows. Although, frankly, there are indicators. But with lasciviousness, now it's public. We don't care. We're going to do it anyhow. This is next Saturday. They're expecting 1,000 people. It's at the Rossi, and here's where it is. The L stands for lesbian, gay, bi, and transsexual pride festival at the Bradenton Riverwalk this coming Saturday. And it's for the purpose of reaching 13-year-old to 21-year-old teens. You can read about it. We'll be looking next week at this whole issue of homosexuality and some of the reasons why it is taking, it's not just this country, the world by storm. And frankly, if you stand against it, expect a serious backlash. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites. And then he goes on, will inherit the kingdom of God. And that's it.
Pretty plain.
Yeah, I think it's pretty plain. It's 10:30. Wow. I feel like I ran a marathon. Brad, would you be so kind as to close in prayer?